It's not fine art, it's more like, it's fine art. I'm Jane Sawyer, and this is Jane Sawyer Makes Fallen Log Bookends in 2 styles. A while back, I rescued this nice looking piece of wood out of a fire. It's a nice beefy piece of hardwood, I think oak, but what really caught my eye here was this 90-degree angle. I have been keeping an eye out for a nice piece of wood to make a pair of bookends ever since I saw these pieces by Nova Scotian artist Adam McNamara. Adam's work is meticulously hand-carved out of exotic hardwoods. Not only are they bookends, but these are truly works of fine art. I want to make myself a pair of bookends, although in my case, this project is not going to be fine art. It's going to be more like, it's fine art. So after I put out the fire on my log, I removed the bark, used my saws to clean up the straight edges, cut it into some nice chunks, wrapped it in hockey tape, and left it on a shelf in my basement to dry for a while. And as I waited for that wood to dry, I had time to think. So I'm all about making art more affordable and accessible, and while I have a garage full of woodworking tools and I'm a person who has firewood around, heck, I am surrounded by wood at all times, making a wood pair of bookends is affordable and accessible for me. But I realize this is not the case for everybody. However, I still want everybody to be able to make this project. I think you deserve a pair of cool looking wood bookends. So I traced my little log pieces, drafted up a template, and put it as a free download on my website so that you can make your own log bookends out of cardboard. I'm gonna walk you through how to do that in just a second, but I'm gonna show you the wood version too, because I think it's really cool to look at art as creative problem solving. And I think part of that is looking at how you can get similar end products based on what resources and materials and tools you have available. I think this is going to be pretty cool. We're going to do 2 different takes on the same project so that you can make your version however you want. Let's do it. Oh, and I'll show you how to put the template together in just a sec here, but it is a free download on my website, janesawyermakes.com. I will leave a link to that in the description. Let's go. So print out the template, pour a bit of glue onto a cereal box, and spread that out with a gift card. Place the printout onto the glue, working from the top left corner down to the bottom right corner. Use a clean edge of the gift card to laminate the paper down into the glue and set that aside to dry. Now that it's dry, carefully cut out the pieces of the template along the solid lines. You need to fold along the dashed line between the back and the curved front. I just folded against a ruler. Grab the bottom piece and use a piece of masking tape to secure it onto the bottom of the back. You're going to flip this around and tape on the semicircular side pieces so that it looks like a big mushroom. You can now fold up the base and tape the other straight edge of that curved piece onto the edge of the back piece. Do that on both sides. Gently bend the cardboard to encourage the front piece to curve, and we're going to tape that piece down, working our way gradually towards the front edge. If you have any extra cardboard on the front, just trim it off. You might have more or less, depending on the thickness of your cardboard. Finally, secure the front edge with some more tape. And this is how your final assembly should look. Obviously, you'll need 2 of these if you want 2 bookends. The next step is to cover this shape with a layer of paper mache. I have a video where I break down my paper mache process in detail. It'll tell you the best glue to use, the paper I recommend, and everything else you need to know. I'll leave a link to that in the description. When your paper mache is dry, you might notice that this is far too light to prop up any book, so we'll need to add some weight. You can fill this with almost anything heavy. A bag of decorative sand will work. Just cut a small opening, pour the sand inside, and patch the hole. You could also just grab some sand or rocks from outside. Use old screws or fasteners you might have sitting in your garage. Clean kitty litter would work. just anything heavy you can think of. I only had one bag of sand on hand, so I ended up using these old marbles we had kicking around. I found a really cool way to make tree bark is to rip up chunks of paper egg carton and hot glue them in layers across my log. This technique is super quick and it looks really convincing. I did this on both my bookends, and then I covered the bark with a generous helping of glue and water to make it hard. While I had the glue and water out, I used it to make a texture paste with some baking soda. I painted that on in curves that mimic the growth rings of a tree. Okay, while that's drying, let's do a bit of work on the wood bookends. Firstly, we're going to cover the side with some packing tape to protect the wood. Okay, for this one, I want to replicate the inner bark that you see on a real tree. I've got this pressed cardboard tray thingy that my grocery store likes to set broccoli in and wrap it in plastic before they sell it to us. It seems like such a waste, but I do think this will make really great inner bark. The texture and thickness is pretty close. I'm breaking out the old dollar store 5-minute epoxy. It comes in this double plunger system, so you can squeeze out exactly what you need in the perfect ratio. I give it a good stir and spread a nice thick coat onto the curve of my log here. Then I set it onto my inner bark, which I'm clamping down with tape. I have a bit of plastic on the back of the cardboard tray so the tape doesn't rip it up. Once it's all clamped together, I give it a firm rock against the table to work out any air bubbles. While that's curing, let's set up a mold to make the outer bark. We'll start by rolling out a slab of Das brand air dry clay.
Okay, so I've got my slab of clay and my tree. I'm just gonna try to smack this on here to capture the impression. I don't have a tripod out here, so I might have to set you down and then I'll show you what it looks like after. And that didn't really work, so I'm gonna try again. Oh yeah, that looks way better. Okay.
Back inside, we'll trim this a bit smaller. I don't need it quite this big. And now I can reclaim and save all of this clay. We obviously need this to dry before we can use it as a mold. So let's check back on our cardboard bookends.
So these are all dry now and they're looking good, but as they were drying, I was thinking, you guys probably aren't gonna forgive me if I don't at least make some of the mushrooms light up. Light up mushrooms are super trendy right now. So I ordered some fairy lights on Amazon and they've just arrived today. I'm going to slice into these guys and try to retrofit those lights inside, and then we can get on with making some glowing mushrooms.
I drafted this little box. You can see the battery pack for my lights fits in here, but the switch is still accessible. I'm cutting into the bookends and I'm sliding the box into the void space. At this point, I realized I should probably make the mushrooms before I move on. Let's make some polymer clay mushrooms with hollow stems so that I can fit the LEDs inside. You need to grab some translucent polymer clay. We're going to build the stem around this plastic tool that I have. A chopstick or a wooden skewer would be fine too, but no matter what you use, you're going to want to wrap it tightly in a bit of aluminum foil. This is the big secret to building the hollow stem. You wrap some clay around the foil, careful not to catch the foil into the clay, smooth it out, and then pull the tool out of the foil. This gets baked just like this, but you can set it aside for now. We're gonna make the foundation for our mushroom cap. This sheet of clay is mostly translucent mixed with just a pinch of orange. Make a flat circle of clay with whatever method you like, and then form that into a dome with whatever tools you've got. Bake this little dome along with your stem according to the manufacturer's directions. After the stems and caps are cooled, you can twist and pull the foil out of the stems. And now you've got a hollow tube on which to build the rest of your mushroom. If that montage went too quickly for you, or you want more detailed info on exactly how I made those mushrooms, I actually posted that tutorial last week. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. So you can see I've already started setting up my lights here. I've put the battery pack of the lights in that little box I retrofit earlier, and now I'm working down my log, bending the wires into little stems in clusters where I want the mushrooms to grow. I'm just folding the wire, making sure the LEDs are lined up. I'm also test fitting the wires inside the mushroom stems to make sure the tangle of wires isn't getting too bulky to fit in there. I just made sure I used all the lights on my wire, but I have heard that you can cut the ends off without affecting the LEDs downline. I haven't tested that, I just used the whole wire in my case. Next, I started threading the mushrooms onto the stems and hot gluing the bases onto my cardboard log. This process was painfully slow because I had to hold each mushroom in place until the glue cooled. If you have any ideas on how I could have held these in place while I was working, please let me know in the comments. When I was finished installing the mushrooms, I used some more scraps of egg carton to cover the wires and glue and make it look like the mushrooms are really growing out of our log. So while the bark dries on our cardboard bookends, let's revisit our wood bookends. This texture mold is finally dry, so let's get some more clay and use this homemade tool to make some bark. Hey, it's me, Jane again. I don't know where the footage went of me taking the tape and the plastic off of the inner bark and then trimming it to size, but obviously I took the tape and plastic off the inner bark and then trim it to size, and then we ended up here. Okay, this is also Das clay. Don't worry about the stuff being gray. I ran out of the white stuff, and of course my local store only had gray. The clay on the finished bookends is actually white. I just had to refilm this bit with gray clay, so just ignore the change in color. I'm using a makeup brush to put some starch onto the mold so the clay won't stick. Then I can plop down the slab of clay and use this little pasta roller to push the clay into the texture. And then when I gently pull it off, boom, beautiful bark texture. One of the great things about this clay is that it has paper fibers in it, so white glue actually works really well to stick the damp clay to stuff. I'm using a generous amount of good quality glue on the underbark, placing the clay on top, and carefully trimming it to size. This clay works really well for this application because those paper fibers really reduce the amount of shrinkage you get as a clay dries, so it works really well for making a skin on a form like this without cracking. I'm setting it to dry like this so that gravity isn't working against me while it's drying. While I was working on this project, I coincidentally had to buy some spackle to fix a hole in my wall, and I actually thought that this would make great bark too. So I'm just showing you quickly here on this paper towel roll how you could use short strokes of a palette knife to make a nice bark texture with spackle. Just a bonus bark technique here for you to consider. The clay bark on our wooden bookends has dried. Among the many things I love about this Das Not Sponsored clay is that you can paint it with watercolors. So that's what I did. Okay, so I've already shown you how to make some more complicated polymer clay mushrooms. Let me show you how to make some dead easy shelf fungus, or fungi, whatever. I cut a bunch of circles out of my clay, then I'm using my knife to slice the circle in half. I pinch out the edge a little bit, and that's it, dead easy. Now I can use some white glue on the flat edge to stick it to the bark. Just make a few different sizes and place them in clusters. It's super helpful to look at some reference images showing how these things actually grow in nature while you do this. If you want to see exactly which reference images I used, I always put my reference images for each project onto a Pinterest board so that you can go there, see which images I used, and click through each link to find the original sources. Okay, so now I've got to let these fungi dry, so let's transition back to the cardboard bookends and see if we can't get them finished up. We're going to use a dry brushing technique to paint these. I'm starting with a base coat of my secret model priming sauce. You can find the recipe for this stuff in my dry brushing deep dive video. There's a link in the description for you. I'm using a raw sienna color base coat for the wood portion and a burnt umber color on the bark. When the base coat is good and dry, I go ahead and dry brush both areas with 2 midtones and a highlight. I do a bit of a wet blending on the wood portion to give it a bit of softness and character. I used a darker color palette for the bark, and I'm super happy with how this turned out. It's hard to believe this bark is just ripped up chunks of egg carton. It was so easy and it looks so good. With the paint dry, I'm going to decorate these now. I've got some plastic ferns, a tea bag, and some preserved moss and lichen. As a final touch, I made this little will-o'-the-wisp inspired creature. I didn't have time to include the footage of making him here, but I'll put a rough edit as a public post up on Patreon so you can check that out if you're interested. When I took these for a test drive, I was really worried that the cable for the lights here would be pressed up against my book covers, and I really don't want this indenting into my books, but I still want to have access to the switch and the battery compartment, so I'm going to use this craft foam to solve this problem. I cut out a rectangle with a space for the battery compartment and the cord and hot glued it into the back of the bookend. You can see I can still remove the battery box and use the switch easily, and now my books have a nice smooth cushion to lay against. clay for my little shelf mushrooms is dry. These are looking a little boring though, so I'm gonna add a bit of white gouache, looking at some reference images of real mushrooms to figure out how I want to make these radiating white lines. I also added a bit of green and blue brown watercolor to make them a bit more grungy and natural looking. With the painting all done, I can finally peel off the tape. I'm going to use a few different finishes here. I make a lot of stuff, so I have a bunch of different finishes in my shop. You don't need to do all this, but I'm going to do it because I have the stuff. I'm using a semi-glossed water-based finish on only the fungi here. I like how it makes all the watercolor bleed, and I find the sheen of this finish looks really natural on these. I'm using an oil-based finish on the wood. Oil on wood can't be beat, and like I said, I already have this stuff from other projects. Oh, and this is some crumbs of preserved moss mixed with a bit of water and matte Mod Podge. I'm throwing on the bark here into some strategic spots. I'm making a similar paste with my tea leaves here and blending that in with the green. These little details are of course completely optional. I like all the grungy texture, but you don't have to go crazy. You can finish your project at any stage you like. I just really love this stage of a project and I'm happy to draw it out as long as I can. The bark, moss, and tea get finished with a couple coats of matte Mod Podge. I add a bit of cornstarch to my matte Mod Podge because it makes the product even more matte. I'll show you some beauty shots of the finished bookends in just a second, but in the meantime, if you could take a moment to hit that like button for me, it would really make my freaking day. Likes make me feel all warm and fuzzy, and it also helps this video get to be seen by other people. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I reply to almost every comment I get here on my channel, and I'm always happy to help out my viewers. I really enjoyed doing the 2 different takes on the same project for this video. Let me know if that's something you'd like to see more of, because I think that's a really interesting concept. I'd be interested in exploring it more myself. Subscribe to my channel if you're interested in more affordable and accessible art info. I post here as often as I can. As I mentioned, you can find the template for the cardboard bookends as well as lots of other free goodies over at janesawyermakes.com. Check it out, follow me on the socials, and I'll see you on the next one.
Do